The neighbor who wasn't there. The door across the hall had always been closed, unremarkable. That night it swung slightly, a gap of darkness revealing nothing, yet the air around it seemed heavier, waiting. Shadows pooled beneath the frame, stretching across the floor, as if something had stepped into the hall and left the darkness behind. The silence pressed unnervingly. A faint tapping echoed from inside, irregular, deliberate, pressing awareness into the walls. Each sound lingered, bouncing against surfaces, brushing perception with invisible fingers, shaping tension that refused to dissipate. The hallway light flickered, casting angles that shouldn't exist. Shadows twisted toward the door, bending reality subtly, drawing attention toward corners where vision could not follow. A chill ran along the floorboards, curling upward. Air thickened, pressing against skin, brushing along shoulders, insinuating presence where none should have been, leaving nerves taut and uneasy. The door moved slightly again, unnoticed by any wind. Shadows leaned outward, brushing surfaces without contact, curling along walls, patient and deliberate, waiting for someone to notice the subtle distortions. A reflection shimmered in a nearby window, showing shapes bending unnaturally. Limbs and figures warped, nested, twisting beyond recognition, teasing perception without revealing form, pressing awareness into the edges of vision. The apartment seemed to tilt, subtle but undeniable. Objects shifted toward darkness. Papers angled against corners, surfaces leaning toward the hall. Space warped quietly, as if preparing for attention. A faint hiss drifted from the vents, low and intimate, threading through ears and nerves. It pressed awareness into perception, brushing against consciousness without source, leaving only subtle tension. The hallway narrowed as shadows stretched. Every corner seemed to bend, elongate, compress, guiding vision toward absence, drawing focus with patient insistence, marking presence without revealing shape or form. Footsteps echoed lightly, precise yet impossible. They circled, moving across surfaces that should not bear weight, reverberating against walls, cataloging awareness with deliberate rhythm impossible to reconcile. The reflection in the glass trembled subtly. Shapes moved independent of reality, bending light, layering presence over the familiar, creating depth where none should exist. Objects tilted, shifted, fell with gentle precision. The apartment seemed alive, orchestrating small disturbances as though testing perception, leaving unease lingering in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Shadows lingered beneath furniture, curling along edges, stretching impossibly, brushing surfaces without contact. Limbs and forms suggested awareness, patient, observing without direct interaction. Light flickered in uneven pulses, revealing glimpses of impossible shapes. Angles bent, shadows nested within shadows, hovering just beyond comprehension, teasing perception quietly, without confrontation. Air thickened again, curling around skin, pressing against movement. Every step was heavier, subtle resistance marking attention, the apartment itself breathing in quiet awareness. Floorboards groaned under invisible weight, precise and deliberate, echoing through the space. Each creak layered memory, every sound a mark of presence in silence. Whispers threaded along walls, weaving into perception, faint and unintelligible. Awareness pressed into nerves and mind without source, leaving subtle but undeniable tension in every glance. The hallway seemed to stretch, bending space around corners. Shadows leaned into edges of vision, following motion without approach, lingering patient and deliberate, teasing attention. A cold draft curled along baseboards, brushing fingers invisibly along surfaces. The apartment shifted subtly in response, stretching and compressing space in quiet, calculated motion. The reflection in the mirror distorted angles further, layering shadows into impossible depth. Limbs bent unnaturally, shapes nested within shapes, presence hovering just out of reach. Objects swayed subtly, papers tilted, chairs leaned without contact. Movements orchestrated carefully, leaving perception unsteady, tension building without form or confrontation. Whispers intensified, threading through gaps and corners, pressing into awareness without source. Subtle marks lingered in every glance, every shift of perception, drawing attention to absence rather than presence. Shadows leaned closer to doors, stretching toward angles where light should dominate. Presence pulsed quietly, patient, observing every movement without ever appearing to intervene. Temperature dropped slightly, curling through air, brushing awareness along every nerve. Motion slowed, perception strained, and tension held space in quiet anticipation. Air smelled faintly acrid and damp. Shadows retreated only partially, corners retaining memory of observation, stretching perception subtly, invisible yet undeniable, leaving unease behind. The final outline of darkness withdrew into walls, subtle but persistent. The apartment exhaled, patient and aware, holding memory of attention, lingering silently until darkness returned once more. Morning light filtered fully, softening edges but not erasing presence. Every corner retained quiet memory, the apartment alive with lingering observation, patient and unseen, waiting for nightfall to resume. Alone on the night shift, the office was silent, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Shadows pooled beneath desks and corners, stretching unnaturally, bending the familiar space into angles that felt just slightly wrong. The hum of electronics carried a subtle vibration, pressing against awareness. Every wire and screen seemed to pulse with quiet attention, the space alive with presence just beyond sight. Footsteps echoed softly, though the floor was empty. Each creak traced across tiles, deliberate yet impossible, brushing against nerves, as if unseen eyes were cataloging every movement in the room. A faint flicker passed across monitors, shadows twisting unnaturally on screens. Shapes hovered for a moment, bending in ways no human could, fading before they could be fully registered. Air grew colder, curling along walls and ceilings. A subtle pressure pressed against shoulders and neck, as if the room itself inhaled, aware of every step and glance. Chairs leaned slightly, keyboards tilted, objects shifted subtly without explanation. The office responded to presence, orchestrating quiet disturbances that unsettled perception and hinted at something just beyond observation. A soft hiss threaded through the vents, intimate and deliberate, brushing along nerves. Awareness pressed against the skin, subtle but undeniable, impossible to locate, yet impossible to ignore. Shadows curled along edges of desks, pooling into shapes that twisted and stretched beyond recognition. Each movement was deliberate, patient, leaving the space alive with unseen attention. The ceiling lights flickered, casting angles that should not exist. Shadows nested within shadows, mending perception, teasing awareness, stretching familiar geometry into something uncanny and unstable. Reflections shimmered in monitors, warped and delayed, shapes bending independently of reality. Presence hovered in these reflections, lingering without form, leaving perception strained and uncertain. Footsteps echoed lightly from the hallway, precise and slow, marking attention across surfaces without ever appearing. The rhythm pressed awareness into the room, impossible to reconcile with any human source. The temperature shifted sharply, curling through the office, brushing against skin. Motion slowed, subtle resistance pressing into each movement, tension wrapping around limbs with patient insistence. Objects swayed, papers tilted, monitors hummed with subtle interference. The office orchestrated these disturbances silently, bending perception, leaving unease lodged in every glance and movement. Shadows shifted independently, brushing surfaces without contact, stretching along walls, hovering near corners. Presence observed patiently, deliberate yet invisible, threading tension through every inch of space. A faint mark appeared on a desk, wet and evaporating. Its shape defied understanding, bending angles subtly, leaving evidence of awareness rather than intrusion, presence marked without confrontation. Whispers threaded through air vents and cracks, faint yet pressing. Awareness brushed against nerves and consciousness, intangible yet undeniable, drawing attention to absence instead of direct encounter. The glow from monitors flickered, shadows twisting subtly across surfaces. Each bend of light shaped perception, layers of observation stacking in corners and edges, unseen yet felt. Air pressed down gently, curling through chairs and under desks. Every movement carried weight, subtle but deliberate, the office itself seeming to breathe with unseen life. Floorboards groaned softly, echoing through hallways and corners. The rhythm marked attention, layering memory of presence into every step and angle of perception. Objects continued to shift with quiet precision. Papers angled, chairs tilted, small disturbances orchestrated, leaving perception uneasy, subtle tension building without direct confrontation. Shadows leaned closer to walls, stretching along surfaces, brushing edges of awareness. Motion was followed, catalogued, recorded by attention that could not be seen but was undeniable. Temperature dropped further, curling through air with quiet insistence. Motion resisted subtly, nerves pressed, and tension held every corner in anticipation, patient, deliberate, unyielding. Reflections warped, angles bending, shadows nested within shadows. Forms flickered at the edge of vision, teasing perception, impossible to fully recognize, yet impossible to ignore. Whispers intensified, threading through walls and vents. Awareness pressed into every nerve, subtle yet insistent, leaving tension lodged in consciousness, perception shaped without physical presence. The office seemed to tilt, familiar geometry altered. Shadows lingered at edges of vision, stretching corners subtly, presence patient, observing silently, waiting for nightfall to deepen its hold. Air smelled faintly acrid, damp with unease. Shadows withdrew only partially, leaving corners marked with memory of observation. Perception subtly stretched, invisible but undeniable, lingering quietly in every glance. Morning light entered slowly, softening edges but failing to erase presence. The office exhaled slightly, calm returning, yet the memory of watchful attention remained, patient and invisible, waiting for nightfall to return. The room that watched back. The door to the old apartment creaked open, releasing a chill that coiled around ankles. Shadows pooled against peeling wallpaper, stretching in ways impossible, as though the room itself was breathing. A faint scratching echoed from the ceiling, irregular, deliberate. Dust danced in the dim light, swirling around corners where darkness seemed unnaturally thick, pressing awareness into nerves and teeth. The hallway light flickered violently, casting shadows that bent at impossible angles. Limbs crouched behind corners, twisting unnaturally, hovering where vision could not reach, patient, waiting. Objects shifted subtly. A cup teetered, papers slid across the floor, a chair leaned without contact. The apartment orchestrated movement like a predator, invisible but intimately aware of each breath. A cold draft curled upward from cracks in the floorboards, brushing skin and pressing awareness into every nerve. The smell of wet metal lingered faintly, unnatural and accusing. Reflections shimmered in cracked mirrors, showing shapes that shouldn't exist. Limbs bent backward, torsos twisted impossibly, shadowed forms nesting inside each other, teasing perception while remaining just out of reach. The walls seemed to pulse subtly, stretching inward. The hallway narrowed unnaturally, drawing attention toward darkness, twisting the familiar into corridors that resisted recognition, each step measured by unseen eyes. A whisper threaded through the vents, low and rhythmic. Each exhale pressed into the chest, invisible yet intimate, curling around awareness, leaving no corner of the apartment untouched. The floorboards groaned under weight that shouldn't exist. Every creak marked attention, cataloging movement with impossible precision, layering tension across surfaces, filling the room with patient observation. Shadows beneath furniture coiled like living tendrils, curling over edges, brushing against walls without contact, watching, waiting, stretching perception into spaces previously trusted, but now subtly alien. The light above trembled, flickering across shapes that bent, elongated, nested within themselves. Limbs moved independently, crouching just out of recognition, teasing awareness without revealing form. Air thickened, pulling at breath. Movement slowed, chest tightened, subtle resistance pressing against every step, marking attention and focus, leaving the apartment alive in ways imperceptible but undeniable. Objects leaned, fell, swayed. Papers glided in sequence, orchestrated to unnerve. Each minor disturbance layered tension, creating subtle yet undeniable awareness of presence without ever revealing the source. A faint reflection trembled in a window, bending perception. Shapes nested within shapes, shadows folding into themselves, lingering in the corner of vision, impossible to fully interpret yet undeniably present. Whispers intensified, threading through gaps and corners, pressing awareness into perception. Voices were faint, incoherent, intimate, weaving tension into the room, subtle but impossible to ignore. The hallway stretched subtly, bending reality. Shadows leaned into edges of vision, moving with patience, brushing the floor, guiding perception, leaving certainty fragile in every glance. A chill pressed along walls and ceilings, curling like smoke. Every breath drew tension tighter, marking observation, embedding memory of the apartment's patient attention into every muscle. The ceiling light flickered again, revealing twisted forms crouched in corners. Limbs bent unnaturally, faces blurred, bodies folding into themselves, teasing perception with grotesque, impossible anatomy. Floorboards groaned again, echoing presence across space. Each creak pulsed through the apartment, cataloging awareness with rhythm it could not belong to a living thing. Shadows stretched along surfaces, following without touch, brushing corners, bending space, lingering at thresholds of sight, patient and deliberate, observing motion without interference. A faint metallic smell rose, damp and acrid. The apartment seemed alive, exhaling subtly, pressing awareness into the chest, shaping space with invisible intelligence, unseen but undeniable. Objects tilted and shifted in sequence. The apartment's choreography left perception unsteady, each motion orchestrated to provoke tension, layering unease with deliberate, silent precision. Whispers moved along walls, curling into corners, threading into nerves, leaving a faint imprint of presence, shaping tension with invisible fingers that lingered after the sound vanished. Reflections in mirrors twisted reality, shadows nesting, limbs bending, bodies folding. Shapes appeared and vanished with unnatural rhythm, teasing perception, impossible yet undeniably present in peripheral vision. The air grew colder, pressure pressing along shoulders. Movement slowed, perception strained, tension thickened, awareness held tightly in every nerve, leaving no step unobserved by unseen attention. The shadows pulsed closer to walls, stretching along doorways, lingering at edges. Presence moved without approach, patient, bending perception, teasing attention into corners where light dared not reach. The apartment exhaled subtly, calm returning without erasing memory. Shadows remained in peripheral vision, stretching into corners, holding quiet memory of patient, unseen attention that lingered indefinitely. Silence settled, but tension persisted. Every object, surface, and angle retained awareness, shaping perception, embedding memory of presence, invisible yet undeniable, leaving unease in every glance. The final outline of shadow withdrew, persistent and patient. The apartment held memory, awareness lingering, waiting for nightfall to resume attention. patient and invisible, subtle but impossible to ignore. Morning light filtered softly through cracks, shadows retreating only partially. The room remained alive, presence embedded, patient, waiting for darkness to return fully, leaving memory etched into walls. The man in the ceiling. A rhythmic tapping echoed from above, soft but deliberate. The ceiling seemed impossibly high, stretching the hallway, shadows pooling beneath fixtures, waiting for attention without revealing intent. Dust fell slowly from cracks, tracing lines down walls like veins. The air smelled faintly of mold and something metallic, pressing against awareness as if unseen eyes traced every step. The light above trembled, casting angles that bent unnaturally. Shadows crouched low, limbs stretching backward, folding impossibly, teasing perception in corners where vision refused to linger. Floorboards groaned under unseen weight, precise and irregular, echoing across the apartment. Each creak pressed awareness into skin and nerves, leaving tension lodged quietly in the chest. A faint rustle drifted from the vents, low and rhythmic, brushing along ears. Whispers followed, unintelligible, pressing memory of presence into every corner, subtle but impossible to ignore. Objects moved without cause. A mug teetered on the counter, papers slid across tables, a chair leaned. Every motion orchestrated to unsettle, a silent mark of attention. The ceiling light flickered again, shadows twisting in unnatural folds. Limbs bent like smoke, crouching just out of recognition, teasing observation, impossible yet undeniable, patient in waiting. Air grew colder, pressing against skin, curling along the floorboards. Every breath felt heavier. Awareness pulled into corners where shadows lingered without form. Reflections shimmered in cracked windows. Shapes nested within shapes, twisting back into themselves, bending perception, leaving memory of attention embedded subtly in peripheral vision. The apartment seemed to tilt, walls leaning inward. Hallways stretched, bending reality, guiding attention toward darkness. Edges of perception warped into tension that refused to dissipate. Shadows beneath furniture coiled like tendrils, curling over surfaces, brushing corners, stretching, waiting. Limbs bent impossibly, crouching in patience, teasing observation without revealing shape. Objects swayed, tilted, fell. The apartment orchestrated minor chaos, layering tension subtly, shaping perception without intervention. Every movement deliberate, precise, designed to unsettle and draw focus. Whispers threaded through cracks and corners, weaving tension into nerves, pressing memory of attention without source. Subtle yet intimate, impossible to escape unnoticed. Reflections bent in mirrors and windows, shadows nesting, bodies folding, forms crouching. Shapes appeared and vanished with impossible rhythm, teasing attention, leaving perception fractured, yet glued to presence. A cold draft spiraled up walls and furniture, brushing skin, embedding memory of attention, subtle, intimate, pressing awareness into every step. Floorboards creaked again, precise, deliberate, echoing across walls and surfaces. The apartment's pulse traced movements, layering unease, memory of attention embedded in every corner. Light flickered in harsh pulses, revealing shapes that bent and twisted, crouching low, stretching into corners, impossible anatomy teasing perception with grotesque, impossible elegance. Shadows moved independently, brushing surfaces, stretching along walls, leaning toward corners. Presence lingered, patient, marking attention without approaching, invisible yet undeniably felt. The air grew heavier, tension pressing into every nerve. Breath slowed, perception strained, every movement catalogued by unseen awareness, subtle but unyielding. Objects shifted again, tilting, swaying, falling. Subtle orchestration left perception unsettled, layering tension, embedding awareness into familiar, yet suddenly alien space. Whispers grew louder, threading through cracks, corners, pressing subtly, intimate, leaving traces of attention without form. Impossible to locate, but undeniable in awareness. Shadows stretched across thresholds, curling into edges of sight, pressing perception into angles where light dared not reach, patient and deliberate. Reflections pulsed faintly, shapes bending impossibly, nesting within shadows. Presence hovered just beyond recognition, teasing observation without intervention, memory embedded into peripheral vision. Temperature dropped sharply, pressing along surfaces and skin, tension curling subtly, marking observation, leaving nerves taut, attention catalogued by unseen intelligence. The ceiling seemed to breathe, rising and falling, shadows pulsing with rhythm, stretching across walls, sculpting space with silent awareness, impossible to ignore. Objects swayed and fell in sequence, subtle chaos orchestrated to unsettle, tension building, layering perception with silent, patient awareness. Whispers threaded between walls, curling along corners, pressing subtly into nerves, leaving faint but undeniable imprint of presence. Attention without form, memory in shadows. Shadows pressed toward walls and doorways, lingering, stretching into corners, marking perception, teasing attention, patient, waiting. The final outline of darkness withdrew slowly, persistent, memory of presence lingering in peripheral vision. The apartment exhaled subtly, patient, alive, waiting for nightfall to resume attention. Morning light filtered softly, shadows retreating partially. The apartment retained memory of attention, quiet, patient, lurking just beneath perception, waiting for darkness to return.